Hello, friends. Many of you know that I'm somewhat of a personality-obsessed individual, and I thought it might be good to take a few minutes and talk through some of the different personality tests that are out there, starting with the very, very basic, the stuff that's been around since Aristotle, and continuing on up into my current obsession, which is the Enneagram. So if you're listening, you're trying to decide whether this is worth taking a listen to, I'm going to cover the four humors and all the different variants that have come because of that. I'll touch on the StrengthsFinder, or what's now called Clifton Strengths. I'll spend some time talking about the Myers-Briggs type indicator, MBTI. I'm certified in that, and I have been for a number of years. And then I'll end with why I have landed on the Enneagram, at least currently, as my favorite pet project. I'll talk about some of the reasons why people may be drawn to these things, some of the good sides, bad sides to each of the different types of assessments, and you can make your own decision on which one you want to lean toward and find more about yourself. All of them, to some degree or another, can be useful, beneficial, if your desire is primarily to better yourself in some capacity. And hopefully that's what we're all trying to do. So let's start with the four humors. A lot of times people will attribute this to the Greek physician Hippocrates, and even in the Roman world, this became relatively popular as a way of describing the way the body is balanced and the interconnection between your body and the four elements, that being fire, water, air, and earth. They gave four different bodily fluids names: black bile, yellow bile, blood, and phlegm. And from these came the four humors, which we call melancholic, choleric, sanguine, and phlegmatic. Aristotle ran with this to some degree, and people, even to this day, are continuing to use this idea, these four different boxes to put people into. You'll see it on what color are you, what animal are you, and even to some degree, the basic concept behind DISC is similar to this. It works in some capacity. It gives you a little bit of an idea of how to categorize people. Typically, the description would be melancholic people are gloomy. They have a darker view of the world. Choleric people tend to be more grumpy, bad-tempered, maybe cynical. Sanguine people are courageous. They tend to be the lovers. And phlegmatic people are calm, cool, and they have it all under control. My problem with this is, this seems to say there's only four types of people in the world, and there's not even a whole lot of flexibility between any of them. You are one, you will always be one, and that's just the way things go. So, take those things for what they are. I would pass on them. You can move on to something like StrengthsFinders, or like I said, Clifton Strengths is what it's referred to a lot of times now. StrengthsFinder is going to be really helpful if you want to figure out what it is that I'm particularly good at and how to maximize those particular things. The premise behind StrengthsFinders is only focus on what you're good at. You spend 80% of your time working on the worst 20% of your life, you're not going to get that much better. You spend 80% of your time, or a full 100% of your time, working on the things that you're good at, you're only going to get better at those things. You maximize on your strengths. You don't worry about your weaknesses. Someone else can deal with those things. Now, to some degree, that's a great approach, especially if you're working in a team. You want to figure out who's really good at coming up with ideas, who's really good at problem solving, who's really good at maybe bringing the group together and making sure we achieve peace and harmony. If there's not buy-in, who's the best person to send to encourage everyone to participate in some way. There's lots of ways that you can take this and run with it, and it becomes a useful tool, especially in groups. The problem that I have with StrengthsFinders, and it's not a huge one, is that it only focuses on the things you're good at. The idea that you take the weak parts of yourself and you completely ignore them can sometimes come back to bite you. And in my personal opinion, it very often comes back to bite you. we're usually pretty good at identifying our strengths, and we usually already know them to some degree. What Clifton Strengths or StrengthsFinders allows us to do is if there's someone who pulls the whole Napoleon Dynamite thing and I don't have any skills, I don't have any things that I'm good at, this is a great approach and a way of getting them on board and getting them to think a little bit more highly of themselves. I don't know that it's great for all of us because usually the things that trip us up are our weaknesses, the things that maybe we don't even realize about ourselves, and the way that we interact with people and fail perhaps in our interaction with people. And so in this regard, I think StrengthsFinders fall short. Which leads us to the MBTI, or Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. Myers-Briggs is going to go out of their way to make sure they tell you they're not a personality test. This is a type indicator, which means these are your preferences. These are the things you tend to lean toward. Given the opportunity 6 times out of 10, you're going to make this decision versus this decision. That's great. It's a useful tool. It's really, really helpful to get us to understand a little bit more about how people tick, sometimes why people do the things that they do, and just how we interact together, that there's no one perfect personality. That's the biggest thing that I learned when I got certified, and as I've been walking through the Myers-Briggs people want to know what's the best personality, what is the type of person I'm supposed to be, and the answer with the Myers-Briggs is be yourself. You are good at what you're good at, and you just need to understand how to interact with the people who are not like you. So Myers-Briggs is based on a 4-letter system. I, for example, am an INTP. So your first letter is either an E or an I. It's a 2-letter dichotomy. 1 letter represents extroverted, 1 letter represents introverted. This first letter usually tries to answer the question of how do I get my energy? Unlike the way people usually approach extroversion and introversion, this isn't do I like to be around people or do I like to hide away in a cold, dark corner somewhere with no human interaction. I've met plenty of people who are extroverts who are the quietest people in the room, and you will sometimes barely know that they're there, but they gain their energy by being around people. If they were to do the exact same thing by themselves, they would be miserable. The same thing goes for a lot of introverts. There are many introverts who, when you get them in a room with a few people that they know, that they care about, that they trust, they open up and they seem like the most talkative people in the room. So that's extroversion and introversion. How do you get your energy? The next letter is either an N or an S. This is N for intuitive. They didn't want to confuse people and have an I. So N for intuitive or S for sensing. This is how you take in the world, how you perceive the world. S's like to only believe the things that their 5 senses tell them are true. What can I see? What can I taste? What can I touch? What can I hear? And what can I smell? They focus their observation practices on only the tangible things in front of them. And that's great. They're really good at having an eye for detail, for seeing what may be missing in a situation, and they're the ones who's going to take copious amounts of notes. They want to know step 1, step 2, step 3, all the way through, and they're the ones who actually tend to make sure these things happen. The N's, the intuitives, focus more on the abstract, theoretical thought, what if types of situations. They tend to do things more based on gut instinct versus what do I see in front of me. They like to try to read between the lines, where a sensing type person will only say this is what's in front of us. The N's, the intuitives, want to say, oh yes, but what does that mean? And so they want to try to apply meaning to things and situations instead of just taking it for fact. Then, once you've actually taken in your observations, you need to make a decision about what it is that you're supposed to do with them. That's what gives us our 3rd letter. Either an F for feeling or T for thinking. Now, this may seem straightforward, but F's feeling types are not necessarily lovey-dovey people who want to go hug trees and other people all the time, although you may find some that are like that. T's, on the flip side, are not cold-hearted robots who have no emotion whatsoever. We tend to like to caricature people that way, but it's really not accurate, and it really is kind of disingenuous. It forces people into a box that they may not actually be in. What these two words actually mean: feelers, Fs, have a tendency, again, this is all about tendency and preferences. Fs have a tendency to make their decisions based on how they value people and situations around them. How is this decision going to affect my family? How is this decision going to affect my ability to move up the corporate ladder or to finish my schooling and my education on time? They factor things in based on the things that they value, and they rank their decision-making and priorities based on what is higher priority to them, and things that are less priority, they gain less importance in their decision-making process. To people who don't understand that, it may look like an emotional decision, but it really is, this thing I have a higher value for, and this other thing I have less of a value for. Therefore, I'm going to choose the first thing. Ts, thinkers, on the other hand, are the objective, logical processing machines. As much as possible, thinkers try to focus only on the objective, not the subjective. They're not going to necessarily factor in how does this affect other people, because a right decision is a right decision. A correct thing is a correct thing. You're going to do what the best decision is, what logic dictates, and hopefully it's for the best for everyone. But that's not the focus of the thinker. The last letter that we have tells us a lot about the thing that we spend the majority of our time doing. We have the letter J, which is judging. That's not to be confused with judgmental, although again, J's tend to get a bad rap for being judgmental. That's not going to be the case. We shouldn't go into our interactions with J's assuming that about them. Judging means the vast majority of the time they spend doing their third function, the third letter, which is making their decisions, deciding, judging. Hopefully that makes sense. They want to get past all the observations pretty quickly so they can get to the judging aspect, the decision making, and then they can move on to the next decision that needs to be made. The other group is the P, or the perceiver. And as the name seems to imply, they want to spend the majority of their time taking in all of the information possible, and they're going to get a bad rap for being last minute, fly by the seat of their pants procrastinators. Ps don't want to make a decision twice. Ps also want to make the right decision a single time, and so they don't have to go back and do it again. This is going to appear to a lot of people as, let's just put it off until the last minute and make it up as we go. And for some Ps, that's really how they live their lives. But it's because they want to spend as much time getting more information. And if I make a decision too quickly, something else may factor into my decision-making process that I missed. And if I just give it enough time, something new might have come to light and I could make a better decision instead of having to go back and do things twice. Collectively, this gives us 4 letters, and there's a lot more nuance to how everything breaks down. But between those 4 letters that makes us who we are, there are 16 different classifications that you can be put into. So again, you end up getting in some sort of a box, but it's not nearly as rigid as the 4 boxes that we talked about with the 4 humors. What I like about Myers-Briggs is that it really does help us differentiate between the way people think, the way people operate, the way people take in their information, make their decisions. It really has gone a long way in helping people understand introversion and extroversion, and not everybody is made to be the person on stage and the center of attention, and that's okay. You're not antisocial just because you want to go home and read a book instead of go to a party. That's who you are. What I also like about Myers-Briggs is that it really helps slot people into where do you factor in large picture decision-making processes. You have some people that are really good at coming up with great ideas and getting initial concepts on paper, throwing things out there, seeing if they stick. That's a great start, but if you only have those people, you're going to generate hundreds of ideas and never accomplish anything. So you need to have other types of people who are going to actually figure out what's going to work, what's not going to work, and pursue those things, figure out the fine details behind all of them, And then you need to figure out, how does this affect the people around us? How does this affect our clients? How does this affect our families? How does this affect our workplace? It may be the logical thing to do, but if you only have objective logical thinking people, you're going to leave somebody behind, or you're going to leave someone hurt. And then, of course, you need some people that are going to be able to, when push comes to shove, make some last-minute adjustments on whatever project it is that's happening, and still be able to push things out and get it there by the deadline. But if your entire project or your entire organization rises and falls on people who are good at doing things last minute, you're never going to be proactive enough to get things done in a timely manner. So you need all types of people working together to be a well-rounded group, well-rounded company, or a well-rounded church. All of those things are vital. Here's the issue that I'm starting to have with Myers-Briggs, and I'm saying this with all the love I can muster for a typing system that I've been using since I was in high school. When I went to actually get formally certified, I ended up essentially helping the instructor teach the class. I know my way around the system. I know its ups and downs. I know its flaws. Here's the issue that I have primarily with it. Outside of the fact that there isn't a ton of psychology behind it, which is the primary complaint that most people tend to have, this doesn't necessarily hold up to psychology. It does a decent job at being a good statistical analysis and helping put people into these classifications, because there is evidence that all these things exist for different people and the preferences are clearly there. This has also been widely used enough that they have thousands upon thousands of these responses, and so they're able to fine-tune as they go to continue to get better responses and better assessments. But largely this is statistical collection of data. I love that type of thing. Again, I'm a T, I love objectivism, and I'm an N. I can take abstract data and turn it into stories. This is something that I love. Here's the flaw that I'm finding over time with Myers-Briggs. People don't know what to do with it. Once you figure out what your type is, there's some steps to growth, there's some pathways to growth, and there's ways to help you become a better person, sure. But all of it focuses around the idea that this is your type, this is who you're supposed to be. You tend to lean towards certain things in certain times of your life and lean away a little bit, but you are who you are. There's even thorough explanations as to why, if you took the test back when you were in high school, or maybe when you were starting a new job, and it doesn't reflect the test that you've just taken yesterday, well, there's a problem with that. At one point or another, you were likely wearing a mask. You were not being the person who you were supposed to be. You were not living wholeheartedly, and to some degree, I completely adhere to that. We all wear masks all the time. Myers-Briggs wants us to say that there is one type that you are, and any time that you live outside of that is you living a lie. I feel like there's growth and development for each of us, and if we're really trying to become wholehearted individuals who are learning and growing and becoming better, then we shouldn't want to stay in the box that we're in. The other thing that people don't usually focus on too much, but exists with Myers-Briggs, is this idea of the shadow. In Myers-Briggs, your shadow is the type of letters, essentially, that you don't focus on. For me, being an INTP, the idea of the S, the sensing, and the F, the feeling, are fairly foreign to me. And so with the Myers-Briggs, they'll give you situations on when the shadow rears its ugly head, when you're experiencing a lot of stress and you do things out of the ordinary, and your reaction is, oh, I'm sorry, I don't know what came over me. That's not like me. And we all have those moments, right? So I've always been fascinated with the idea of the shadow, and I know Carl Jung, who initiated a lot of the conversations that basically have become the Myers-Briggs, he was fascinated with it as well. I don't think that we fully developed that to the degree that we need to, because for the most part, Myers-Briggs is about cognitive development and cognitive processing. How do I see the world? How do I make my decisions? And how do I organize the world? All of these are behaviors in some way, and so it didn't really ever help me address the question of why is it that I do these things? And when I act out of character, what's causing that to happen? So a few years ago, I stumbled across this something called the Enneagram. It's exploded into popular culture now, and if you haven't heard of it, I won't say you've been hiding under a rock, but you at least don't run in the same circles that I do, because it's something everybody's talking about now. Here's why I've become so interested in the Enneagram. While all these other types are focused on your behavior, when you take a test, it's going to say, this situation happened, how would you respond? Or which of these two words appeals to you the most? And all of those are going to give you a good idea of how it is that you behave. What it doesn't answer in any capacity whatsoever is, why did I behave like that? As I said before, my primary interest was in the shadow, the darkness inside of me that I don't fully understand and don't know how to deal with. What drew me to the Enneagram was the idea that that's the focus. What is the primary sin, the primary shortcoming that I tend to continue to run to over and over again for support, for comfort, to help me cope in some way with the world around me? And it's something that I've been doing since I was a child. That's at the heart what the Enneagram is. It helps you identify one of 9 different numbers that you are, or the box that you've created for yourself is actually the way that we describe it. What walls have you put up and barriers you put around yourself in order to protect yourself from the world as a child? And then understanding that you're not a child anymore, at least most of you listening are not, but we all want to and need to grow up at some point. Grow up into wholeness, become a complete person. And that's what a lot of these other types and personality assessments are missing. Wholeness is not running to the farthest corner of any of these boxes. Wholeness is coming to this sense of balance right in between everything. That there is no perfect type, and we've acknowledged that, but the idea of running to the center, that's the heart of our journey. As Christians, the way we describe it is finally living out the person that God has declared us to be and has created us to be, instead of continuing to live out the lie of who we tell ourselves that we are. And that has a lot of power to it. That has the ability to change people's lives. And so the focus of the Enneagram really is to say, this is the number that you've put yourself into. Now this begins your journey. This isn't the end now that you've identified the number that you are. And this isn't the person you're supposed to be. The rest of your life should be spent trying to get yourself out of the box that you put yourself into, because you were made to be more. And somewhere along the way, you started believing lies about yourself and the world around you and the people around you that have caused you to completely stall out in your growth and development. The other big thing that I love about the Enneagram is how interconnected everything is. Once you start digging in deep, you realize that in strength, I move to this number. In stressors, I move to this other number. And so we start to be able to understand how each other acts and operates. And I wouldn't say commiserate with each other, but I understand how other people are feeling when they're stepping into maybe my number, or when I can see strengths of, for instance, my daughter, who when she's feeling strong and confident, that she actually takes on some traits that are really good in myself, and I can see that, and I can be very proud of those things. It allows for so much interconnectivity and understanding, which allows then for empathy. And in a lot of these other ones, you put people into boxes and you don't really understand who they are and what they're dealing with, because the idea is there's differences. Everyone's different and you need to embrace the differences. And that's great. But I think what the world needs more of right now is to understand how similar we actually are. Well, I've been talking for a while. We touched on the 4 humors, StrengthsFinders, Myers-Briggs, and finally the Enneagram. Hopefully this has at least helped you understand or wrap your brain around what the differences are, which ones may be of most interest to you. If you have any other questions, comments, please feel free to contact me. You can leave a voice message. You can interact with us on Instagram at More Thing Podcast. That's the number 1 More Thing Podcast. Or search for Facebook or Twitter for Despised Samaritan. You can even go to despisedsamaritan.com. That's my own personal private publishing company that I've launched a couple of books from, and that's the umbrella that I'm using for this podcast as well. If this is something you want to hear more about, especially the Enneagram, let me know that too. I can maybe devote a few special episodes specifically to breaking down each of the types, but I don't want to waste anybody's time, so let me know if that's of interest. All right, that's all I've got for you today. Until next time, be good to yourselves and be good to others. This episode of One More Thing Before I Go is sponsored by Anchor.fm. When I first had the idea of making the show, my primary obstacle was deciding which platform to use for my recording, hosting, and distribution. Anchor made it so easy because they do all 3 things and much, much more. It's free. They have creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will even distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more platforms. You can make money from your podcast, whether you have 2 listeners or 2,000. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. All you have to do is download the free Anchor app or go to Anchor.fm to get started today. Well, that's all the time we have for this week. If you like what you heard, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you do your listening. You can even interact with me directly if you go to anchor.fm/One More Thing Podcast. That's the number 1 More Thing Podcast. There you can click on a link to send a voice message. That's a great way to give feedback or let me know if you too would like to be a guest on the show. It's that easy. Special thanks goes out to BigFish_music for providing our theme music and transitions. If you like what you heard, go check him out on Instagram or Facebook. Thanks again for listening to One More Thing Before I Go. Until next time, be good to yourself and be good to others.